I recently talked about a few different cuts of a steak in my last video, and one of my absolute favorite cuts is the bavette, and link to that up here if you haven't watched it yet. And I've got some of that here, which is absolutely full of flavor because it's from a very hard working muscle. But if you don't cook it right, it can be a bit tough and a bit chewy. But in this video, I'm gonna be showing you how to cook this, and I'll be serving this with some sweet potato wedges, some blistered tomatoes, and a lovely chimichurri sauce. So first up, I've got a large sweet potato here, which I'm just going to cut into medium-sized wedges. So I'm just gonna season this with some salt and some pepper, and I'll just drizzle some oil onto there. Just give it a toss. Make sure it's all coated with the oil, and into the oven this goes for around 35 to 40 minutes to roast off at 180 degrees Celsius. While the potato wedges are roasting in the oven, I'm gonna be making a beautiful chimichurri dressing. Now, I have got a handful of mint and flat leaf parsley here, which I'm going to be chopping really fine. So if I just bunch these all up and just run my knife through them. Now, generally with soft herbs, you don't really want to be going at them with your knife over and over again, because you are going to end up bruising them. But for this dressing or for chimichurri, it's absolutely fine. You really want to be chopping them up really, really finely. So into a bowl we go. And then we'll add in a good pinch of dried oregano, and I'm just gonna add in a few cloves of a good quality olive oil, just about enough to submerge the herbs into the oil. And next I'm gonna finely chop a clove of garlic. So if I just give it a crush with the knife, the skin comes off really easily. And then I'll just finely chop this and then give it a crush with the blade of the knife. We just add this into the bowl. And next up, I'm gonna add a whole chili, but I will finely chop this as well. Now, with the seeds in the chili, you can take them out if you don't want a lot of heat, because a lot of the heat from the chili comes from the seeds and the membrane equally. If you want a bit of heat, just leave them in there. And I'll just get a bit of salt and pepper in there. And just a bit of red wine vinegar for a tiny bit of acidity, but not a lot of it, because we don't want that vinegar to be overpowering. So if I just give this a little mix. That's the chimichurri done. And I'm just gonna set that to one side and turn my attention to the steak. And that's for the steak. I'm just gonna start with some oil, and I suggest you add your fat to the beef as opposed to the pan, as you'll be minimizing the amount of smoke that comes from it. Now I'm just gonna get a thick bottom pan or a cast iron skillet on a relatively high heat, and then I'll just season the beef with some salt and pepper. You can be quite generous with the amount of salt that you get onto the steak. as you are going to be losing a lot of it in the process. Now I think the pan has just come up to heat, so in we go with the steak. And when you go in initially, just hold the steak down just to make sure it makes good contact with the surface of your pan. Now we want to be searing this for about 3 minutes on one side, and then when we get a good amount of crust on one side, we just flip it over and just let it sear for about another 3 minutes on the other. Once you've seared the steak on each side for around 3 minutes, you just want to go in with some butter, a few cloves of garlic, give it a crush with your knife, and a few sprigs of thyme or rosemary, and I have got thyme here. So I'm just going to turn the steak over again for the final minute and just go in with a few bits of butter and a few crushed garlic, as well as some thyme. Now at this stage, just tilt the pan away from you and start basting your steak. So I've now cooked this steak for about 5 minutes on each side, and I'm just gonna take it out the pan and just let it rest for about 5 minutes. You generally want to let your steak rest for around half the time you spend to cook it. And when you let your steak rest, you let that residual heat to carry over the cooking process, and you get a really nice even cook all the way through. And finally, while the steak is resting, I'm just gonna blister some cherry tomatoes, which I'm gonna be serving with it. So just get your pan on medium heat and then just go in with some cherry tomatoes, add some olive oil in, season with some salt and pepper. And after about 3 or 4 minutes, once we see a bit of char on them, we just add in about a tablespoon of balsamic vinegar and just give it another 30 seconds, and then we can just remove it from the heat. And that's the blistered tomatoes, really nice and simple. So everything's now pretty much ready, and all we've got left to do is just plate this food up. Now bavette is best cooked to a medium level of doneness. Anything under or over, I think you would find that the steak is going to be a little bit chewy. So when you come to slice the bavette, you need to make sure that you cut this against the grains. Now if you look here, you've got these meat fibers or the grains running from this side, and essentially you just want to cut it against the grain. If you cut it along the grain, you'll find that again the steak is going to be chewy. So I'm just going to slice this against the grain, and on the bias, really nice thin slices. And as ever, the end bit is the cook's treat. It tastes absolutely delicious. And finally, I'm just going to spoon over a bit of that chimichurri sauce, which I made earlier. And there we go, that's my bavette steak, which I've cooked to a medium level of doneness. and I've cut it against the grain. This steak is absolutely full of flavor. I've garnished the steak with a beautiful chimichurri, and also I've served it with some blistered tomatoes and some sweet potato wedges. Now it's time for me to dig in. Before I go, I hope you enjoyed this recipe. If you did, please make sure you give this a like and give the channel a sub if you haven't done so already. That would really go a long way in helping me grow this channel, and I will be seeing you in the next one very soon. Until then, look after yourselves and remember, the secret ingredient is love.